Former U.S. President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to all 4 charges of trying to overturn the 2020 election.
He called the charges, quote, a persecution of a political opponent and said it was never supposed to happen in America. The ex-U.S. leader is due back in court on the 28th of this month. If convicted, he could face jail terms of up to 55 years.
This is the 3rd criminal case brought against the former president. The other two involve classified documents and hush money. Despite the charges brought against Mr. Trump, he currently leads the Republican candidates by a wide margin in the lead up to the 2024 presidential election. All right, for more, let's speak now with Stephanie Lindquist. She's a foundation professor of law and political science at Arizona State University. She joins us this morning from Philadelphia. Professor Lindquist, firstly, I want to get your reaction to the 4 criminal counts from the indictment. Are there strong grounds to believe that the charges against Mr. Trump will stick?
Well, obviously, in the court of law, the charges have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt and have to be proven to a unanimous jury of 12 jurors. And so it's always a challenge and an uphill battle to choose to prove facts beyond a reasonable doubt in any court of law. However, these charges are not unique. They are commonly brought against criminal defendants in federal court. So these are not charges that federal prosecutors are unused to proving in court. And the indictment itself is quite substantially full, right, of a lot of evidence, and there will be more to be seen in the court in support of these charges. The indictment is very carefully drawn, narrowly focusing on Donald Trump, identifying co-conspirators, but not making them co-defendants. So in terms of proof in court, the prosecutors can really focus like a laser beam on this single defendant, Donald Trump, and what he knew, when he knew it, and the activities that he undertook to undermine the peaceful transfer of power in 2021.
Yeah, the indictment alleges on its first page that Trump made claims about election fraud that were false and that the defendant knew that they were false. Why is it important to establish what Trump knew or believed? Isn't it more about his actions?
Well, under these statutes, under these laws, these federal laws, there is a mental element that must be proven. It's called mens rea under the criminal law, and it's really the mental state. The defendant must be shown to have knowingly engaged in these deceitful actions, these fraudulent actions that defrauded the United States. And so, indeed, the prosecutor must prove the defendant's state of mind. And that's the reason why the indictment is so clear on all of the indicators and the demonstrations of proof to the president throughout the election period and thereafter that there was no fraud in the election. And he was told that by many of his closest advisors, the Department of Justice, et cetera, by officials in the states. And so that is why the indictment focuses so much on the proof of what he should have known and indeed did know, because he made some statements that indicated that he did know that the election had not been stolen. So, yes, it matters under the federal law.
Professor, looking at some hints from his defense team, there's an idea that they're hoping his free speech defense could work. But do you think this line of argument is likely to succeed?
I don't think so. Certainly that is what he's going to raise, both the free speech defense, that he was well within his free speech First Amendment rights to make claims about the fraudulent stealing of the election, even if those claims were false. But the bottom line is that the crime charged involves a conspiracy to deceive and defraud the federal government. And conspiracies are undertaken through the spoken word. Just because the words are spoken by a defendant does not mean those words are forevermore protected by the First Amendment. In fact, speech does ultimately lead to and can lead to criminal liability. So I don't think the First Amendment defense will work very well. There is no First Amendment defense to defrauding the government. The other defense he'll raise, as was mentioned by Steve previously, is that he did not know that the election had not been stolen.
Yeah, so when do you think this trial will take place then, and how does this indictment fit into the larger legal challenges that Trump is facing? This is arguably the most important one, isn't it?
It's very clearly, to me, the most important one. It's focusing on an activity that ultimately was focused upon, that itself was focused upon undermining the peaceful transfer of power from one presidency to the next. And so this is clearly the charge that strikes at the heart of our democracy most profoundly. And Jack Smith, the special prosecutor in this case, is really, I think, very committed to bringing the case to trial prior to the election. But that is easier said than done. These cases, these criminal cases, often take up to a year and a half to come to trial. There may be a number of motions that are filed that have to be decided before the case can even come to trial or even have a jury called. Those particular motions, if they're denied, if they're motions by Donald Trump to perhaps dismiss the charges against him, if those are denied, they may go on appeal. And so we have the process of appeal. So there can be many things that can take place prior to the trial beginning that can delay this case considerably. But Jack Smith, again, has promised a speedy trial. And in the interests of democracy, I would say that it's most important that the trial take place before the election. But it is not a given.
And Professor, with another indictment looming in Georgia against Trump, what are the chances of public interest surrounding Trump's legal development sort of waning, as growing list of charges pile on?
Well, there is a problem of sort of exhaustion, right, by the electorate in terms of trying to follow all these indictments. And it's unlikely that most of the electorate are reading these indictments or following them carefully. And so there may be some exhaustion, but I do think that as these cases proceed to trial and as more evidence comes out, some of this evidence may be even more explosive than what we've seen already, or at least will add to the explosive information and charges that have already been brought. I think what Donald Trump believes is that the more indictments that are brought against him, the better it is for him, because it makes it look his argument, of course, is that he's being persecuted, particularly by the Biden Department of Justice. And so he views the piling on of indictments as actually beneficial to him. And indeed, he may be right when it comes to his base, to his electoral base in the Republican Party, who may see these additional charges as just more evidence that the Democratic district attorneys, the Democratic president who's sitting in the White House, are interested in bringing down the leading Republican candidate for the presidency in 2024.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that would play out in the wider American populace. So thanks very much, Professor, for your thoughts this morning. Stephanie Lindquist, Foundation Professor of Law and Political Science at the Arizona State University.